Good evening and a very warm welcome to you all, esteemed speakers, dignitaries, well-wishers, students and friends. I hope you are staying safe and keeping well. On behalf of the Chennai Center for China Studies and Surana International Attorneys, it is my privilege this day to welcome you all to this fourth Surana Knowledge Series and C3S Institutional Dialogue on Approach to IPR in China, Strategic Policy Lessons for the World. Intellectual property rights have assumed a central role in innovation, with the phenomenal technological, scientific, and medical strides being made the world over. Moreover, changes in the global economic environment have influenced the development of business models where intellectual property is a key component establishing value and potential growth. China's rapidly evolving economy, which follows a techno-nationalist approach, has revealed that intellectual property is at the core of its national strategy. At the same time, China's reputation as a repeated violator of intellectual property rights precedes itself in their ambitious attempts to establish the PRC as a global superpower. In this regard, it is pertinent that we pay attention to the IPR landscape in China by addressing the policies and the economic and legal realities that support its innovation and IPR structure. We are joined today by an expert panel that will aid in our understanding of this subject. Before I hand the session over to Dr. Vinod Surana to introduce the topic and the panelists, I would like to take this opportunity to briefly introduce them. Dr. Vinod Surana is the managing partner and CEO of Surana Surana International Attorneys, Chennai. He has qualified from prestigious institutions such as Harvard, Cornell, the London School of Economics, and the Indian Institute of Management. He chairs the National Institution for Quality and Reliability Advisory Board and is the vice chairman of All India Manufacturers Organization, TNSP. He is listed among the 100 legal luminaries of India by LexisNexis and is recognized as a leading M&A lawyer by Chambers and Partners. Dr. Vinod Surana is a rare combination of a successful lawyer, social worker, academician, policy advisor, and strategist. It is an honor to welcome you, Dr. Surana, and without further ado, I hand over the rest of the session to you.
Thank you so much. So many kind words. I think it is the bias of a team which likes you and works with you a lot. Thank you very much. A very good evening and a very warm welcome to the fourth Surana and Surana Knowledge Series of 2021, an initiative taken by our law firm to provide valuable insights on topics of national and international interest to our stakeholders from the legal profession, the judiciary, government, policymakers, think tanks, industry leaders, and of course, our own colleagues. For today's topic, which is Approach to IPR in China, Strategic Policy Lessons for the World, we are delighted and honored to partner with the highly reputed and influential think tank, the Chennai Center for China Studies, members of which include distinguished diplomats, bureaucrats, policymakers, academicians, defense officials, society leaders, among others. I thank the Chennai Center for China Studies for joining us and for their hard work in putting this whole project together. My special thanks to Commodore Vasan, the dynamic director of the Chennai Center for China Studies and one of our distinguished speakers today. Friends, the object of today's webinar is to enlighten our participants on how intellectual property is viewed upon in China and dealt with by China. What lessons policymakers in government and corporates must learn while dealing with China. The structure for today's program is that after I give a brief introductory remarks and set the context, I will introduce the panelists and request each of them to present their views for about 7 to 10 minutes each. Thereafter, we will have deliberations of the subject, including question answers, for about 45 minutes, which will in total be about 90 minutes. Please feel free to post your comments and questions in the chat box, and I will try to get as many of them answered as possible. Today, the world is in awe about China's economic and military development in the past 20 years and its growing geopolitical assertion, especially after the Beijing Olympics and the international financial crisis. How did China become a manufacturing giant so quickly? How did China master sophisticated technologies so quickly? How are Chinese companies able to dominate most of the emerging fields in industry? Canada, Brazil, and India joined the WTO on 1st January 1995. China joined on 11th December 2001. Yet, how come there is so much difference in the industrial development of these four countries? These and many more such questions stare at us and we look for answers. This is where IPR comes in for its well-recognized This is where IPR is well recognized and is the heart of the economic conflict with China. Authors further two broad theories, one of natural evolution and the other of rule of law. The evolutionary theory argues that China's path to IPR protection is similar to that of the United States historically and will evolve into a strong IP regime as China develops more IPR by itself. It is only a matter of time, they say. Whereas the rule of law theory or the rule of law approach regards the systematic violation of IPR in China as a result of the disintegration of the rule of law, the disregard of the rule of law by the Chinese government. While both theories and approaches have their merit and add to our understanding, they do not go far to address the more fundamental policy issue, that is, China has benefited from the rule of law globally while it continues to follow the rule by law domestically. This has provided a huge and unfair advantage to Chinese firms, most of which have significant government ownership or government influence. I believe it is vital for us to understand and factor into our deliberations and decisions the unique political and economic system of China, the party-state system. What are its motivations and interests from a political economy perspective? This perspective focuses on preservation of its monopoly, and an independent judiciary therefore cannot practically exist. In 2018, President Xi said that the Chinese Communist Party must strengthen its leadership over law. The party will not imitate other countries' models or practices. It will never follow the road leading to judiciary and independence, he seems to have said. According to the White House National Trade Council advisor, the Chinese state uses a number of policies to facilitate transfer of IPR, one of them being adverse administrative approvals and licensing, which the state uses as a tool to extract concessions, which is normally technology. Another policy, according to the White House Trade Council advisor, is burdensome and intrusive testing, which is a way of extracting information and extracting technology. Therefore, the thought is the active participation of the state in the economy has eroded the boundary between state ownership, state influence, and state involvement. There is some evidence that suggests that the party state has used its clout and its powers to build massive economies of scale and technical expertise in key industries domestically, so that they can enter other countries and defeat domestic competitors there. Examples of Chinese railways and Chinese telecommunications are glaring. Similarly, the case of Huawei is a good example to show that Chinese officials demand judicial independence in the case of Meng Wanzhou, while they disallow judicial independence at home. Huawei sues governments in United States and Europe for violation of its commercial interests, while in China, firms cannot sue the government. So with this broad overview and backdrop, I will now introduce our distinguished panelists and call upon them to present their views before we get into deliberations and question answers. I must say that we have a fantastic panel, 4 very distinguished panelists, each from a different country. We have Brazil, Canada, Germany, and India represented on the panel. Our first panelist is Mr. Gabriel Leonardos. He is a senior intellectual property attorney based in Sao Paulo, Brazil, and a partner in the firm Kasznar Leonardos, and the vice president of the Brazilian Intellectual Property Association. Mr. Gabriel Leonardos holds a master's in law from Munich, a master's in economics from Sao Paulo, and a master's in business administration also from Brazil. He is much sought after for his extensive expertise in patent law and is called upon to speak at various professional and industry forums nationally and internationally. Mr. Leonardos.
Thank you very much, Dr. Surana. I hope you can all hear me well. It is a great pleasure to be here this morning. Well, of course, for me, it is morning. And good evening to all of you who are in a later hour. I am today spending the weekend in Rio de Janeiro, even though I live and work in São Paulo. You probably know Rio de Janeiro from the famous song, The Girl of Ipanema. I will remind you how it is. So I must apologize. It would be much nicer to listen to Frank Sinatra than to my presentation. But I'm here in Ipanema, and it is a pleasure to be with you all over the world at this moment. I thank Dr. Surana and Commodore Vasan for organizing this very interesting meeting. I send my best regards to all fellow speakers and also to those who are attending this event. I must also thank Christian Campbell, who is here with us, a colleague from the IBLC, the International Business Law Consortium, who recommended my name for this distinguished panel. Brazil is the 5th largest country of the world. It is the 6th more populous country in the world and the 10th largest economy of the world in gross domestic product adjusted by the purchase power parity. Our economy is largely based in goods with low technology. Brazil's mining production, as well as agriculture and livestock production, are among the largest of the world. China is the #1 trading partner from Brazil, importing approximately $70 billion annually from our country. This is approximately 1/4 of all our exports. And China buys mainly iron ore, soybeans, sugar, and meat. It is not incorrect to say that Brazil is today the barn of the world due to the incredibly huge surplus of food that Brazil produces and exports. What is certainly a blessing for Brazil, it is also a challenge in many aspects. The abundance of food we produce is a blessing because we have enough for domestic consumption and to export. We reached such stage of high productivity in agriculture due in great part to technological advances in using and exploring the land. And of course, we have a lot of land. However, this is also a challenge because Brazil did not pay enough attention to its educational system and neither to updating its industry. Therefore, not only Brazilian companies are mostly disconnected from the large chains of industrial manufacturing worldwide, but also for several decades, the Brazilian industry has not been investing in research and development for new products as it should. The number of domestic patent applications in Brazil is extremely low, less than 5,000 patent applications annually filed by Brazilian companies. And over 80% of all patent applications filed with the Brazilian Patent Office are originated from abroad, mainly from the USA, Europe, and Japan. This is a major challenge that is now being addressed by the Brazilian government, but there is no easy solution, and there is certainly no quick solution. Brazil has many things in common with India and China, and a lot to learn from these two magnificent countries. We are three countries with large portions of poor people, and one aspect became especially evident in this pandemic, that we need vaccines that prevent diseases or medicines that completely cure illnesses. Most pharmaceutical private companies have a clear economic incentive to treat diseases or alleviate symptoms, but not necessarily prevent or cure them. Government policies are needed to increase the research and development and production of vaccines, both for this pandemic and for the pandemics which are likely to happen in the future. Brazil offers universal health coverage to all of its population. Sometimes the health care may not be excellent, but it exists. And this is obviously one of the largest expenditures of the Brazilian government. Therefore, these expenditures should achieve the highest possible efficiency. I believe their cooperation in the future prevention and cure of illnesses is probably the main area of cooperation between our three countries, which could bring the larger benefit to all our peoples. Brazil manufactures locally in two large governmental laboratories, one in São Paulo and another one in Rio de Janeiro, vaccines from Sinovac with active ingredients imported from China, and also from AstraZeneca with active ingredients imported from India. So far, 44 million residents in Brazil have already been vaccinated with at least one shot, or 21% of our population. I could not finish my intervention without expressing the profound thanks of the Brazilian people for the solidarity that both India and China are demonstrating in this pandemic. Without the active ingredients of the vaccines that we import from China and India, the current plight we are facing would be much worse. Let us all learn from this pandemic and start to cooperate regularly for the welfare of our peoples without the need to wait for another emergency. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gabriel. I now call upon our next speaker, Ms. Caroline Berube. She is the managing partner of HJM Asia, a boutique law firm with offices in China and Singapore. Caroline is licensed to practice law in New York and Singapore, and she holds a bachelor's in civil law and bachelor's in law from the famous McGill University, Canada. She has worked in South Africa, Thailand, Singapore, and China, and is sought after for her expertise in corporate, commercial, and IP matters. She is a regular faculty in institutions in Italy, France, and Canada. Over to you, Caroline.
Thank you so much, Dr. Surana, for the great introduction. And thank you so much for inviting me to share my thought and on the interesting situation of IP in China. I also want to say thank you to Chris Campbell from IBLC to give me this opportunity as well, and for everybody attending this session on a Saturday afternoon or Saturday night or morning, depending on which time zone you are in. So I will, I guess I've been in Asia for 21 years now. My specialty has been studying Chinese law back in the 90s. I thought like China was going to be a big platform, a big IT platform. And this is why I eventually moved after Singapore, Bangkok to Guangzhou, which is very close to Shenzhen. We call it the Mecca of IT in China. I'm sure India is a huge IT platform, lots of amazing technology companies. So I would say like Shenzhen is not like India, but it's where most tech company go set up their business in China. So that's the reason why I went to Guangzhou, because I wanted to be close to the heart of tech companies in China. So of course it has been evolving tremendously in the last 20 years. I would say in a very positive manner. And I will show you shortly numbers, and it's always impressive. Like I've been doing this China work for many years, and I would say like every year I do a certain reflection, and I realize like how they have been aggressive and planning the growth and where they are now. And I guess it goes for historical reason, like they have been doing like their 5-year plan for so many years. And they do implement, they don't only make a plan, but they do implement in a very strict way their plans and their wish. So if, a bit like what Dr. Surana mentioned, China joined the WTO a few years later than India. So in 2001, I was lucky enough to be there. And of course, all the law changed so much. So whatever I studied in the late 90s, of course, doesn't exist anymore, has been amended many, many times. I'm not sure if all attendees are trained lawyer or also business people, but from a legal perspective, it has been changing every year. And if we go to the slide, if someone can move the slide to the next one and make it a little bit bigger. And I like this slide because it just showed that as soon as China joined the WTO, they really went on to amend all their IP law. So you can see like trademark law was amended. It was set up in 1983. Most of them were in the 90s or the 80s. But as soon as they signed they joined the WTO, China made a special effort to amend their IP law. So each of the law, if you look at each of them, trademark law, copyright law, and patent law were amended in 2001. About 8 years later, all these laws were also amended, and they have just been recently amended again in 2019, 2021. So the government, I would say every 10 years, they really do try to revamp and update their law. And it has made a huge impact, I would say, for our clients. A lot of our clients have technology that they want to protect when they come to China. And of course, I'm sure everybody has heard about this. the law exists, but what about enforcement? And I guess this is a big fear for most business people. You can have the best law in the world, but if you cannot enforce it, there's no court to enforce it, the judge don't know about IP, how are we going to be able to protect it? So this is just a legal platform on that slide, just to show the evolvement from a legal perspective. Now, if we look at the next slide, which is more like on the international level, and to compare whether, whether China is in line with other countries. Yes, they are. They signed the TRIP agreement, they signed the Paris Convention, the Madrid Agreement, the patent, the PCT, the Nice agreement. And if you go to the next slide, I tried to make a chart, which was very, can we move to the next one? No, I see like a question. Hong Kong and China have different IP laws. So let's say you want to register your patent or your trademark, you're gonna have to do an application in China, and you'll have to do an application in Hong Kong. So they follow parallel system. Can we just move to this slide, the slide 4? Yeah. So this is just a summary I wanted to show, you can see, so there's a bunch of countries who have signed different international IP convention, and you can see that China has signed all of them. Compared to Hong Kong, for example, we didn't sign the Paris Convention and didn't sign the PCT, nor the Nice classification. So you can see that even with the international convention, China and Hong Kong are a bit different. We talk a bit, of course, I'm admitted to practice in Singapore, so I always follow what's happening in Singapore. And Singapore, a bit like all the Western countries, have signed all the convention. Something that is very interesting about China, we can see all the convention they have signed, but there was one thing that they didn't agree yet, was to follow the Nice classification. For those who are IP lawyer here in the room, so there was a parallel classification when you register a trademark, for example, that you had to find a class for the trademark that you wanted to register, which is always in Chinese, but it was very different than the classification that you had in the Nice classification. So 2 years ago, they decided to follow and endorse the Nice classification. So now for IP lawyer, it makes our life so much easier, because if a trademark is registered in class, let's say 35 in Canada and the US, the same class 35 will apply in China. Before, we had to play around and find where the product we're falling into. So this made our life a lot easier as IP lawyer, but it's again, just showed the fact that China wanted to embrace what was happening in the West, given that they have some pressure, I guess partially because of the media. Everybody hear about the fact that China is not easy for IP. Can we protect our IP and blah, blah, blah. So they do have this type of pressure. So I guess that's why they keep endorsing law from the West. If you move to the next slide, it's something that always impressed me. So if you look at the numbers, like China, of course, big country, 1.3 billion people, India, similar. So the numbers will always be bigger than Canada or Singapore, for example. But if you just look at numbers, just for example, the trademark, and I like to see this comparison, because you just see, in 2011, there was about 1.4 million application for trademark. In 2009, so 8 years later, there was 7.8 million trademark application. This is huge. It's a huge, huge, huge increase. If you look at invention, if we move to the next section, which is more patent, invention, utility, model, and design, you can also see the trend. This trend has not been as steep and increased as steeply as the trademark, but you can still see an increase. For example, for the invention, about 500,000 to 1.4 million. For the utility model, we went from about 600,000 to 2.2 million application. So you can see that people are considering China, and they do want to protect their IP. It's something that is important. Also, interestingly enough, when we see these numbers, we would say, oh, it's all the company from the West who want to protect their technology. A lot of these IP rights are from local companies. When I say local, it's Chinese company. So they do want to protect their own IP, and it's not only foreign companies that want to protect their IP in China. Now, if you look at, let's say, like a category like 2019, 7.8 application, 7.8 million applied for trademark, but only 6.4 were granted by the Chinese authorities. The reason is like, a lot of these applications were trademark applied in the previous year. Again, when I say like, the law changed, the law improved, but the government also put in place new system. First they combined the patent and the trademark office. Now it's one office. They also set up hire more people to process the application faster. So we went from about 3 years time to get a trademark approved to now 12 to 18 months. So we reduced it by half the time. So again, it's very encouraging because when you see so many applications, like you wonder, like, how long is it going to take me to be able to be protected in China? So more officers, office combine, and a faster track to register your trademark and patent. So it makes it a lot faster to be protected, which is also very positive, and they didn't have an option to do it. So this is important to keep it in mind. If we move to the slide 14, which I believe is very important. So we talk about the law existing, the fact that they're very based on the West, the process of registration, your IP is faster. Now, what about if someone infringes your right in China? Is it possible? Yes, and a few reasons why I think it's very positive development. First, the government has set up 5 IP courts throughout China. Only 5, but their own specialty is only IP. So if you want to, instead of going to a commercial court, you go to IP court. And why it's useful is because the judge has expertise on IP. It's not like any commercial judge, they do have expertise on IP. So because of this, like it brings better judgment from my perspective and from my past experience. Before, like any judge was assessing a commercial, labor, or IP matter. Now we have people who have this special experience and can give a better overview and come with a better judgment. So this is a good improvement from my perspective. The second nice improvement that I've seen, a lot of our clients were trying to sue the infringing party. The reason why they were doing it was to get damage, of course, awarded to them, but also to stop the company to infringe their right and to copy and do counterfeited product, which were after exported to the rest of the world. So it was to show to this infringing party, listen, stop doing it because there's consequence to your infringing action. The detrimental aspect of this, though, was that the damage that our client was getting, was so low. Like it was not worth it financially. A lot of times the legal fees were higher than the damage the company would get. So luckily last year, and some have been amended, for example, for patent, the damage that you can get now in an IP court from the defendant are a lot higher. Again, when I say higher, like it's definitely a lot lower than what you would have in the US, but it's a lot higher than what you used to have in China. So if you look at this, the patent right, for example, if there's an infringement, you can get up to 710,000 US, as of June 1st, so early next month, compared to before, which was only $175,000, which, like really, it's almost like 4 times more. So it does make a lot more sense now to try to enforce and to enforce your IP. For the trademark owner, also an increase since 2009, so you can get up to 5 million, so about 713,000 US, which before was only 420 or 430,000 US, plus reasonable expense. If there's a malicious infringement, it can go to 1 to 5 times above the calculation. So the 713, can be times 1 to 2 to 5. Copyright, before you could get 71,000 US, and now you can get up to 713,000 US. So again, it's a huge increase. Again, lower than what you have in the West, but definitely better in China these days. I see that there was a question on the chat asking how much more. So if you look at the chart here on the slide, it was 175, and now you can get up to 700,000 US. It's about 4 or 5 times more than what you used to be able to get. So now, is it easy to sue in China? It's definitely not easy, but it's not easy in any country to prove your damages. to prove a loss of profit, it does take time. So I would say, like, if I just saw another question now, how long does it take from the beginning to the time that there's a judgment awarded, a judgment rendered? It can take between 6 to 12 months. So again, I'm Canadian. I haven't worked in Canada for 21 years, but I have colleagues in Canada, and the process of a court hearing and judgment takes a lot longer than what we have in China. Again, China is not a perfect jurisdiction, but there's a lot of improvement being done. It's fast compared to other countries. I don't know about India. I don't know if it's faster or slower than India, but it's definitely faster, I know, than Canada. The damage are, however, lower than what you would get in the West. But compared to China, compared to the 2001 to 2021, you can get higher damages. One thing that I would like you to keep in mind, it's everything, and I'm sure in India it may be different, that the hearing will be done in Chinese. So of course it is a challenge, you know, because most people do not speak Chinese when they invest in China. But like any other court hearing, like, you know, you have lawyers representing you, and the hearing will be conducted in Chinese. So I can see there's another question which about, like, you know, neutrality of a court, for example, compared to local companies versus foreign companies. I would say, like, you know, most of the time we do represent foreign companies, and I would say 80% of the time so far, the court has been really fair to our clients. I don't think they were in favor more of a Chinese company. If there was a counterfeited product or infringement, they were looking at it from a neutral perspective. So overall, again, China has improved a lot. There's a lot of work to be done, of course, but I feel at least it's positive development, and they keep up the pressure to be in line with what you can find in other Western countries. So yeah, if you have any questions, please, I'm happy to answer questions after, or you'll have my email from Dr. Surana. So I'll be happy to answer your question by emails or after the session in a Q&A. Thank you so much for listening, and I do hope you have learned something.
Carolyn, that was a very exhaustive, very well presented. You covered a lot of points. I have made some notes. I will come back to you on this during the Q&A. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Surana.
I would next call upon our colleague from Taipei, Taiwan, Mr. Roick Feng, who is the co-managing partner of Zhong law firm. Mr. Feng has a bachelor's in law and a master's in law from the National Taiwan University and a second master's in law from the Northwestern University, United States. He is an accomplished IP lawyer. Apart from advising large domestic and international clients and corporates on the entire gamut of corporate and commercial laws. He is currently assisting foreign banks to manage and integrate their acquisitions of domestic financial institutions. Mr. Feng has thoroughly researched the legal structures and business models of companies in emerging industries and is well positioned to advise in that sector. Mr. Roick Feng, your views, please.
Thank you, Dr. Vinod. First of all, thank you, Dr. Vinod, and all the fellow panelists and everyone joining this webinar. And especially thank you everyone's time in this in this weekend, evening, morning, and afternoon. Thank you very much. Being a Taiwanese, we are the closest neighbor of China. So I guess we have the privilege of closely observing how China has been skyrocketing these years. And we share the same culture, and we know each other very well. We have many historical legacies. So I guess apart from, and thanks Caroline sharing the legal perspective. It's very comprehensive. So I guess I will share some more aspects from a practical point of view, especially from Taiwanese. Our firm, Zhong Law Firm, we are an alliance firm of the Zhong Law Firm Greater China. So we have been practicing cross-border, not only IP, but also transactional matters and projects in Taiwan, China, and all over the world. So we kind of feel like we have a very unique angle to observe how China has been, be so successful in this couple decades. So I guess, especially from IP development, I guess we have, in respect of their approach to the IPR upgrading strategy, I think we know the following. I would like to share more to every one of you. First of all, I believe sharing the same culture, I believe the first aspect they can be so successful is because they have the ability of self-upgrading. The world has seen China's ability in various aspects, picking up in economics, technology related, and IP development is definitely one of them. Although the policy seems to be shifting a little bit, we have seen China being very open-minded to every part of the world for decades and decades. China gradually lifted its entry barriers to the world, promulgated new foreign investment laws and IP laws and regulations, and evolving themselves in the IP legal system, just like Caroline just mentioned. And they move away from total protectionism and all that. I believe every piece of this showing that China has the ability to be one of the top successful countries, especially in the IP and technology in the world. However, I have to say development in IP right is not just like building up a culture. It takes time. So other than by self-upgrading themselves, I believe they did a very good job. We also noted a few from a few perspectives that the reason why they have been very successful ever since. So the second aspect I would like to share is, according to our experience and our own view, I believe China did a very good job in their merger and acquisition strategy. It's not only from the private sector, but also from a nation sector. We all know if you want to build your IP, it takes time and it's not very easy. So, but if taking over somebody who has already had very well-established IP portfolios is another story. While it's still very difficult, but probably it's easier than developing your own. So over these years, we have seen, well, especially via sovereign M&A funds or semi-state-owned M&A private equity. Well, it happens a lot. Chinese companies, for many reasons, doing M&A in many countries, and one of the purpose is to acquire very valuable IP rights. And I believe it's a very common practice in the capitalism countries, but obviously the communists play it way better than the rest of the world. Well, there's no right or wrong, but it just happened. So I believe that's the second reason, and they have been so successful in IPR. And the third aspect I would like to share is their policy of welcoming cutting-edge talents. It's just like a couple of decades ago, US governments welcoming everyone from the world to the countries. We have seen China embracing cutting-edge talents very well. China is like a magnet, and people go to China for work from all over the world. So without doubt, I have to say, what happened in Taiwan as well. Taiwan is one of them, just like the rest of the world, but probably we have been, I hate to say suffering, but it happens in Taiwan, we're suffering the most, especially in the semiconductor and IC design industry. We all know Taiwan, we're the country, we call ourselves a technology island, and we play an important role in the supply chain of semiconductor and IC design. And we all know all these years, China is trying to pick it up, and they did a very good job, of course. Well, one of the most key factors you want to be successful in the cutting edge technology field is you have to have talent. So that's where the IP rise from. So you need talents. So what we have seen this year, China has welcoming cutting edge talents, like I mentioned. But I have to say, talents come and go. It's the destiny of market economy. It happens. But it's never easy to define what is, poaching talent or simply a job hopping by talents of its free will. But from national policy standpoint, again, there's no right or wrong and no difference. So that's the second thing we have seen it happening in China this year. And I believe this is also one of the most important reasons they have made themselves a big success. And the last one we have seen is the private. It's a great, there has been a great collaboration between the private sector and the government. When it comes to competitiveness of a country, it is very important that the private sector and public sector working closely together. And it happens, I have to say, it happens in China, and they did a very, very good job. But on the other hand, sometimes if we're talking about the competition, well, the closely working together between the government and the private sectors, sometimes it means government subsidy. So we have seen Chinese government, they subsidized in many industries to enhance the competitiveness of the private sector. And again, there is no right or wrong, but being the closest neighbor, Taiwan, we have been hammered badly, and I believe the rest of the world has been suffered similarly. So I guess, again, this is also a lesson learned for other countries that a great collaboration between public sectors and private sectors can make a great success, especially in the IPR strategy. So I guess I will pause a little bit here and turn it back to Dr. Vinod, and thank you all for listening. Thanks.
Thank you, Roy. There are a few questions which I have made a note of. Public-private cooperation is one among them. I will come back to you on this during the question answer session. Now let us hear our next panelist, our co-host, Commodore Vasan, the director of Chennai Center for China Studies. Commodore Vasan has had a very distinguished career. He retired from the Navy and the Coast Guard after 34 years of highly meritorious service, where he has commanded warships, naval air stations, a long-range maritime air squadron, was Chief Staff Officer a regional naval commander, instructor of the Naval War College, among many other important positions. He is the former chairman of the Aeronautical Society of India, the president of the Navy Foundation, and currently, apart from being the director of the Chennai Center for China Studies, is either on the governing board or is a faculty member on 7 prestigious universities and educational institutions. He has over 100 papers published in edited volumes, journals, both domestically as well as internationally. Commodore Vasan is a regular invited speaker at national and international conferences, universities, and think tanks. Commodore Vasan, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Vinod, for the gracious remarks. I also would like to extend my greetings to all the fellow panelists. They have made some wonderful presentations, and I must say that some of the portions that I wanted to cover in the introductory part has already been covered by Carolyn. Now, this was related to the development of IP in China, in terms of the sequencing and how it developed over the period of years, and what all did they accede to in the run-up to the present format that they are following. Must also thank Roick from Taiwan, because there are a lot of perceptual differences in what we look at as happening in China and what has been presented as happening by both Carolyn and Feng. So we should be conscious of these first-hand inputs that have come from these two speakers, because they've been there, they've seen it, they've observed it, and they're reporting about what is happening out there. I must also now thank Dr. Vinod for giving us an opportunity to be the co-host in the knowledge series. Now, this is the 4th one that they are conducting, and I am sure there will be more such knowledge series that will be conducted by them, and we will join hands whenever required. When you talk about knowledge, what comes to your mind is obviously knowledge is power. A cliched phrase, everybody tells you that knowledge is power. In terms of China, I would like to give a slightly different perspective to what has been presented here. And in the case of China, knowledge is power, and I must get it by any means. So, looking at to use the terms of Rock, there is nothing wrong, there is nothing right about how you build your comprehensive national park. So, when you look at China, the way they have tried to improve their own comprehensive national park, politically, militarily, strategically, economically, by using the existing systems of the world, whether it is WTO, whether it is WHO, or whether it is any other instrument which is there, they have ensured that initially they study what is existing and see how they can integrate, not to be part of the global order, but to derive the maximum benefit from these existing structures. So we saw what happened to the Wuhan virus crisis. WHO, everyone told you, was in the pocket of China because of the funding. And Trump also at one time withdrew all the funding that was being done. And so there's a lot more investigation that is now being recommended as far as the origin of Wuhan virus. But in the, when you follow this up further, there's been a lot of discussion on waiving of the IP rates for vaccines. Our friend from Brazil told us that, there is a requirement of vaccines. They are looking at both China and India. And there are, these APIs which are required for the pharmaceutical industry. And this waiver, which people are talking about today, would ensure that the humanity together would be able to provide the solutions which are required for saving the humanity. So you saw that there was an initial reluctance because, as our speaker from Brazil also brought out, there's a lot of money involved in the pharmaceutical industry, in the vaccine business, whether it's Sinatra, whether it's Covaxin or COVID, there's plenty of money that's involved there. And people would not like to share the formulae, and also would like to hold back on the ingredients which are special. However, hopefully that will be overcome. That's only one part of the IP. Let me come back to the issues in China. The reference document for me and for others who are interested would be the congressional report which was submitted on 17 September 2020. This is not very old. It is just about 6-7 months old. When you go through that, you'll realize that there are a lot of unresolved issues between USA and China. So not that everything is hunky-dory as far as implementation of IP in China is concerned. Though they acceded to the WTO in 2001, the amount of setback that they've had in getting a favorable resolution on many occasions is mind-blowing. There are 1 or 2 examples which I would like to give just to bring down the seriousness of these discussions. Now, there was one particular case where Levy, who are registered in China, sued a local company in Guangzhou for infringement of the rear 2 pockets in Levy's jeans. Interesting, right? And this went on for some time, and then they realized, yes, the positioning of the rear pockets in the Levy jeans was copied by this company in China, and they applied the penalty. Another interesting case on Microsoft. This was some years ago. The one I quoted was just about a couple of years ago, but one from Microsoft was that there was a company which copied the holograms of Microsoft, and total of 650,000 of these were counterfeited. And they went to court, obviously, and Microsoft won the case. And guess what was the penalty? A huge sum of $242 was imposed on the violator, whereas the value of the holograms which were there for Microsoft was 30 million. So there was a certain amount of distortion in the way the laws were applied, the IP laws in China. It is reassuring, of course, to hear from both Caroline and from Mr. Feng that there are improvements there, and they're slightly trying to upgrade themselves. I think this was a word that was used by Mr. Feng to say that they would like to upgrade themselves and integrate themselves in the global system. Will that happen? I'm not too sure, because you saw what happened in 2019 and 2020 under Mr. Trump. So there was this trade war. It was all related to the assessment made that something like $200 to $600 billion dollars, or perhaps were subject to IP thefts in China. And this was an assessment of some 500 industrialists in USA who were surveyed, and that was a serious figure, which is why Mr. Trump came into the trade war regime, and they started imposing tariffs on China. And there was, of course, counter tariffs which were applied by China, and the value went up to 200 billions on one side from USA and another 100 billion from China. So why I mentioned these figures is that while we would like to accept on face value the first-hand reports that were given by both Caroline and Mr. Feng, the situation on the ground is not something that is totally yet conducive for investment from abroad. The many people, I have some figures here. I'd like to give you those figures of how many patents are there in China, which is very encouraging. The total of 14 million patents apparently were applied in China. But please remember that all this was for domestic. So the ratio of such patents within the country worked out to something like for every patent that was applied in South Korea or Japan, there were about 3 which were in USA, and there were 4 to 5 in China. So that was the ratio. That means China was way ahead in terms of the number of patents that they put it there. So, but when you look at the number of patents that were applied in foreign countries, that is whether it's USA, Japan, India, France, wherever you want to, that gives you the actual story of where China stands today. And this ratio is for every patent applied by China outside their country, you have Japan, which has applied 3 times the number, that runs it about 210 or 220,000. And America has, applied 4 times the number of patents in countries outside of US. So that tells you where China stands. Obviously, they would like to correct this figure. They would definitely like to apply for more patents. But in the meanwhile, what is it that they're doing? Go back to the words that I used by Mr. Feng. Right or wrong is not the issue. I need to add to my worth. How do I do it? By stealing. There is recorded evidence. I'm using a term stealing with a lot of evidence that is available in the open domain. And a lot of this has been stolen through various means. This is through, last year you realized that there were 1,000 people who are apparently recruited from the PLA who are going into universities in USA. And they were denied their admission when they realized that they were sponsored by the PLA. So the modus operandi is very simple. Not only your diaspora is engaging in stealing these IP items, which are of importance technologically, they also use eavesdropping, they use industrial espionage, they use their PLA scholars who are sponsored by PLA to study in universities abroad in USA, West, Europe, etc. And this is where there is a certain amount of question on the means that are adopted by China. I don't think we can be happy about the means which are adopted, but of course you can't blame China. It is like saying that I allowed a thief to come into my house. You should have taken precautions, right? You should have put barricades outside. You should have put a guy with a gun or whatever and ensured that he did not come in. So, this is where you see the kind of standoff that is taking place between USA and China in terms of trade war. The WTO, of which all these are members, including us, you find that is helpless because they have two bodies. One is the famous appellate body and the other is the WSP. So this requires a quorum of 3 members, which has not been there because America has not approved the names of people who they felt were sympathetic to China. So there is a standoff. So many of the registered complaints have not been handled. So the appellate board, which is there, has also not made much progress. So I think I may be running out of time. Let me flag 2 issues. No, because the title said strategic lessons for India and others. I would include all the democratic countries in this description. So the strategic lesson, what are these lessons that are there? Today we have use of artificial intelligence. We have enormous databases that are available. So the World IPO, that WIPO, that is World Internet Intellectual Properties Organization, if you go to their website, the amount of data that you will get is phenomenal. This is where we should start as think tanks to look at the kind of analysis that's been made. Let me quote an example. There is this section on innovations that were done in 2020. And region-wise, they have indicated where are these innovations taking place. And you should be happy to see that in South Asia, India is there, obviously. And in the East Asia, you have Singapore, Hong Kong, not China as such, but Hong Kong and another nation. So all these are given there. And more importantly, when you look at the patents, the number of patents, and in the areas in which they are, requesting for these patents, that gives you an idea of where that country is working. So if there are something like 50 to 60% of patents applied on artificial intelligence, that country is looking obviously to improve their work in AI mechanisms, including modern science and technology. So this was seen in Xinjiang province, where people who did not want to be quoted have said that it is the AI technology that has gone in here for not just monitoring people by cameras, but when he is interrogated in a police station, even he can make out what his emotions are, and based on which he can be booked. So, this is something like the replication of the Orwell's book, so this is where I feel that there is a plenty of data that's available through the World IPO. And this is our starting point for me. If you are trying to understand what the IP is doing to the rest of the world. IP is only one part of building a comprehensive national park. It is a tool. So, but in terms of study for a think tank, I would feel that a lot more efforts are required to see the pattern and then understand, in inverted commas, the strategic lessons in liberal societies. Thank you. Jai Hind.
Thank you, Commodore Vasanji. I have made some questions. Now we go on to the question and answer session and the deliberations. We will start from where our last panelist left off. He mentioned about the number of patents being filed in China and the number of Chinese patents being filed overseas. And this gives a sense of direction that Chinese companies are currently more inward looking. So what is the panel have to say? Can we start with Caroline? Is China manufacturing and designing only for Chinese market? Why is it that the Chinese companies are not filing enough number of overseas patent applications?
That's a very good question. Thank you, Dr. Surana. Yeah, they don't file as much. I believe, like, you know, they already manufacture, they have a big domestic market already, which I feel they do want to protect. So that's why, like, the percentage of registration and application in China is mostly for Chinese companies. I feel they have enough, right? So when they go overseas, you know, like a lot of time it's for a product that don't have so much technology. And if they do have technology, if we think about Huawei or ZTE, they go to Africa most of the time. You know, they go to other developing countries. So I feel when they export their product to the rest of the world, most of the time it's like the low value added product, which probably don't have so much technology anyway. And they keep their technology and they register it on the local market. So this is my take on this point.
Okay, I will mention here, I will recollect Roick Feng, our other panelist, he mentioned that it is easier to buy out technology than to develop. So is that a reason also why Chinese companies don't file applications, patent applications overseas, because they already have him through the acquisitions?
Yeah, it can also be a good point. They also do a lot of reverse engineering as well, right? So they buy out technology, they do reverse engineering. So it could definitely be a few these reasons why they don't register trademark or IP patent overseas. Like, you know, like it's probably a faster way for them to acquire technology. I know, like, I represent a lot of Western companies, and a lot of them sell their technology to the Chinese company. We always have issue about the valuation, though, because the Chinese counterpart always believe that our client's technology, even if it's a great technology, they always believe it's worth a lot less than what my client thinks. So I feel they always try to get a good deal.
Commodore Vasan, Caroline touched upon a very interesting concept, reverse engineering. And we have seen this in the defense, where the Chinese government has reverse engineered, I would say reverse engineered within quotes because we don't know where the IP came from, reverse engineered the F-22 fighter, and the Russians have formally lodged protests for having reverse engineered the Su-27 series. What is your take on that? IP in the defense sector.
Thank you, Dr. Vinod. That's a very interesting point you made. It's very simple. When you look back at the defense development of China, most of it initially came from Soviet Union. And, you know, they also thereafter, when the Americans started coming with commercial aircraft, whether it's the Boeing or the Lockheed Martin people, they made it a point to set up those factories within China. And, you know, there was a word that was used as FTT, that is forward technology transfer or coerced technology transfer. This is the term that's used in IP. And, you know, they ensured that these companies which wanted to invest, you know, came with a lot of preconditionality, you know, which required transfer of technology, which required diversification, which allowed Chinese to do a lot of it. If you look at any of the aircraft or weapon systems, you know, you can always correlate and see which is the model that they copied and reverse engineered. The good thing perhaps is that not only do they copy, they improve on what they copied. That is where you must grant them some additional marks for not just copying, but also for improving on the product that they got at whatever price. So, you know, whether it's F-22 or whether it is another stealth takeoff which was put on display a few years ago, when you even compare the dimensions, a lot of study has been done on dimensions by comparing the photographs, by looking at the drawings, by looking at the flight envelopes. It's very clear that all these are copied. So, but again, going back to Mr. Feng, it's not right or wrong. It is what I want to acquire. If there is an opportunity, I will acquire it. Because if Boeing wants to set up something here, I will impose those conditions that suit my growth, which is how they succeeded in the past. We should not ignore this fact. So, you know, this is where we stand in terms of the IP in defense products. And also, I must bring it to your notice. I'm sure many of my colleagues who are here from the Navy, Army, Air Force would definitely watch for it. Even today, China has not perfected the technology for manufacturing aero engines. It is still being imported. So obviously, not every, and the West has become wiser. They're not going to sell the technology today anymore. They're going to ensure that China will continue to pay for these engines till they develop it on their own. I'm not saying that China does not have the capability to develop this technology, but it will take a long while. The lead times are phenomenal. So this is what we need to keep in our mind.
Roick, you made a statement. China has been very successful in embracing top talent from all over the globe by paying very high salaries, things like that. Now, I am appointed by the government of Taiwan to represent Taiwanese investments in India. And during my conversations with the Taiwanese, this comes up very often, especially in the semiconductor industry. So, as a country, what is Taiwan doing to prevent this brain drain?
Yes, thanks for the question. And well, trying to be neutral, I believe Chinese government has shown they're open-minded to the world, and they embraced, like I mentioned, all type of talents to their country. But being the neighbor here, Taiwanese government, or I shouldn't say Taiwanese government, I should say Taiwanese companies. It's more from the private sector's point of view. A lot of talents has been, well, quote and unquote, poached to China, but we have seen that all those talents, well, I shouldn't say all, most of the talents, when they decided to work in China, and especially in the high-tech industry, semiconductors, IC design, fab, foundry, it's oftenly seen that those talents, after they've been poached, quote unquote, they've been poached, not more than 2-3 years, they will come back. The reason why is because I believe they have, kind of contributed all they got, and Chinese companies, they kind of pick it up very easily and fast. So they catch up very fast, and then they don't need those talents. And after the contract ended, they send them back. And we have seen this very often in Taiwan. So we have been facing a very, strict challenging, especially being a very, very important role in the IT supply chain. So, well, I mean, competitiveness is a good thing. So I think this, like I mentioned, and there is no right and wrong, but this is something we have been suffering. So like you mentioned, we, Taiwanese government, we have been doing a lot trying to prevent this kind of, well, quote unquote, national crisis. So we kind of make our trade secret acts more strict, and fortunately and or unfortunately, we have some court cases recently this years, and it's all related to Taiwanese high-tech companies, high-level management or RD talents. They moved to China, and well, individually they breached the Trade Secret Act and this kind of things. So I guess our government is also picking up ourselves, and well, we'll see.
Right. Before I go to Mr. Gabriel, I have Mr. T.K. Rangarajan, who has been a long-time member of Parliament. He has joined us, and he has raised his hand a couple of times. So, Mr. Rangarajan, would you like to ask a question?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. See, my point is, thank you, Mr. Corona, Vinod, have given me the opportunity to participate in the discussion, and I'm able to listen. Very good panelists. They have contributed a lot. I understand so many things from them. But when we discuss about China or any other country, China from 1948 to 1978, they have concentrated on health and education. After 78 only, they started moving out of the world. And from 2001, they have developed this thing. But our point is in India, we have a lot of problems. They have got one language, one country. We have got several countries, several language, several type of talents. We are not able to pool everything in one area. So when you talk about China, they are very clever, very intelligent. When they liberate the Hong Kong, Deng Xiaoping said, one country, two system. They maintain Hong Kong as a system of capitalism, and they maintain a system of socialism. This made them more advantageous to China. So their approach is different on every area. That we have to take note of. Otherwise, we will commit a mistake. We will become an anti-China or we will become an anti-Taiwan. India must learn from everybody, and our own way we have to develop ourselves. That is my point. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. You made a point that China till the 70s and 80s concentrated on healthcare and education. So I will take this to Mr. Gabriel, who mentioned during his talk that Brazil has for long neglected education and industrial upgradation. Brazil industry is currently low-tech. So Mr. Gabriel, what is your opinion or advice to the government of Brazil on how they can leapfrog and catch up with the rest of the world?
Thank you, Dr. Surana. Well, I believe we in Brazil are looking very carefully to what China is doing. And there are a lot of comparisons in Brazil between what happened with South Korea and what happened with us in the last 30, 40 years. So we have a sense of urgency, a sense that we need to catch up. And we are probably a little bit delayed too much in this race for technological development. And we have the feeling that the speed is only increasing now with the next developments in artificial intelligence. For example, there are many people predicting that in 5 to 10 years, we will have a big jump in technological development. And last year, for the first time, the Brazilian government conducted national debates to create a national policy of development of intellectual property. It was a very interesting debate involving many people in all areas. And I think that we are now starting to go in a similar direction as Japan in the 70s, South Korea in the 80s, and China now is pursuing. And I may even be as bold to say that even though I completely agree with Caroline's analysis about how Chinese companies are devoted now to their internal market, I think that the overwhelming quantity of technology being developed in China now, which is shown by the huge number of domestic patent applications, will eventually flow over to foreign countries. I would certainly expect that in 10 years from now, we will be seeing a huge number of Chinese patent applications going abroad, probably surpassing those from the United States and Japan. So I think that the world now is moving in a different speed and in different spheres. And Brazil must use its huge biodiversity wisely in a sustainable manner to be able to reap some of the benefits of the development of technology. As I said, it's a big challenge, and I hope we are able to cope with that. Thank you.
Thank you. Caroline, I have a question for you. During your presentation, you mentioned that in China, they keep amending the law very often. Now you did your legal studies from Canada in the beginning. Common law system, lots of precedents and former cases to be followed. So how does it work in China? Does it make life very complicated for the legal practitioner because laws are changing all the time?
Yes and no. First of all, I did a common law degree and a civil law degree. I did both.
Okay.
And China is, and like being in Asia, like it's a mix. Some countries are civil, some countries are common law, like Hong Kong, Singapore, definitely common law. The French influenced country like Vietnam or civil. China is, I would say it's a mix. It's more towards civil law. From my perspective, everything is codified. In fact, the new civil code just came into place a few months ago. So when I say they often change the law, it's like if they change it every 6 months, right? It's every like 2013, 2019 for the trademark, and for patents it was like a bit earlier, and then 2020 and 21. So it's not like if they change it all the time, but we will do some slight amendment from time to time on specific part. But it's not like if they do a full revamp of the law all the time. But I feel like compared to a more traditional jurisdiction, like I would say probably Singapore, Canada, the law is not changing at such a fast pace. But I believe, like I know, like I guess India is part of a developing country. Is the law changing as also? Do they try to adapt to the new needs or it doesn't change as much as it seems to do in China?
Thank you. I have a question for both Roick, Feng, and Caroline. Commodore Vasan pointed out that there is a concept of forced technology transfer, FTT, where for the last several years, maybe 20 years, China has insisted that anybody who wants to set up shop in China must have a local partner, must bring in the technology into the local company, and must manufacture locally. What are your thoughts on that?
I'm happy to go. Thank you, Roy. So there's a catalog of investment in China which split the different sectors in category. Encouraged, restricted, and prohibited. So the encouraged sector, you can go in many sectors and you don't need a Chinese partner. The restricted one, you need a Chinese partner, and the prohibited, you cannot have a Chinese, you cannot enter as a foreign company. So I would say over the last 20 years, the catalog of investment has changed a lot and has been opening up to more and more sectors. I would say that the sectors that are the trickier from the Chinese government is the one related to military. Banking has some restriction in some ways, insurance, internet, so these sectors would definitely be trickier in terms of getting approval from the Chinese authorities when you set up a business. One aspect that I can concur with Mr. Vasan was that so if a client bring a technology to China and the Chinese company want to buy it, or it is part of the contribution to the paid up capital, you need to have a valuation by a third party. A lot of time the third party is linked and has to be approved by the Chinese government, and the valuation that will be given will be lower than the real valuation. So this is a bit of a tricky part, but I would say it's not in every project that a company needs to bring a technology that needs to be evaluated. It depends if they want to use that technology to be used as a paid up capital.
Right.
Yeah, thank you, Caroline. On the legal and regulatory parts, I share the same view with you. And well, we have to answer this question. We have to know that China is a very complex country. On the one hand, it's so successful in economic and technology development and all that. But on the other hand, one time I've chatted with a friend. She's a very experienced lawyer in China. And when it comes to internet, content, national securities, well, I have to say she responded that in China, while the economy is so successful and the market's so open, everything's related to the politics. So on the one hand, I can say it's a free market. On the other hand, everything is related to the politics. So as long as it's aligned with the national policy, I believe it's one of the most open market in the world. However, if it's not, well, I have to say, sometimes it's very headaching. Even you want to structure, well, in other countries, even you want to structure a kind of investment mechanism. So I guess there's no easy answer to this question, but I have to say it's because of the politics environment, because of the culture and the global situation. Everything's changing so fast.
Okay, I have two questions for both of you once again. Roick, during your comments, you mentioned about successful public-private collaborations, and you also mentioned about subsidies.
Yes.
So the two questions are, one, is there anything called the private sector in China? Because outside we have a perception that everything in China is either significantly state-owned or significantly state-influenced. For example, the recent episode with Alibaba, Jack Ma being put inside, Jack Ma being the IPO being stopped at the last minute, sends a very clear message to the outside world that in China, the government has a role or ownership in everything. So one, the first question is, in China, is there anything called private? And the second question is, state subsidies. The European Union, the United States, Korea, many countries have raised objections saying Chinese companies are getting subsidies in various forms, free capital, interest-free loans, free land, things like that. So is there a private sector, and how serious is the subsidies issue? Who would like to go first?
I guess I'll take this one first, Caroline.
Okay.
Sure,
If you don't
perfect.
mind. Sure. Well, I guess I will get back to Vinod, your second question first, and then we go back to the first one. Well, subsidies, obviously, well, it's really a chicken egg question. Public and private sectors close collaboration made a great success in China comparing to all the rest of the world. However, on the other hand, it can be an undue subsidy, quote unquote. Subsidy, in particular, export subsidies, allow many Chinese companies to undercut competitors, enabling market domination, but not in every aspect, but in some. Well, after all, it's a combined asset and wealth and entire nation against the foreign private companies. But I think this is all related to the national policy. Again, I don't think there is a right or wrong, but it's the facts I've seen. Going back to your first question, well, I believe you mentioned a very, very good point on there. I don't think every company in China is state-owned. It's obviously not true. But I believe it's state-influenced. Not every company is state-owned, but I believe most of the company are state-influenced. They can be 100% private. They listed in all famous capital markets, but it can be state-influenced. So going back to what I mentioned in your last question, everything is related to politics. So if, well, putting it this way, if politically correct, then it can be it can be a very open market. But if it's not, like you said, everything can be state influenced. That's from my personal point of view.
Carolyn,
Yeah,
what's your
thank
take
you.
on that?
Thank you, Rock, for your comments. For the subsidy, I know it's your second question. You know, like for a long time, the government gave a loan with free interest, but they really did try to do two cleanup. One was in 2001 and 2002 of non-performing loan, which cleared a lot of companies. And I remember I was representing a few banks then, working for a Chinese firm, and we went through thousands and thousands of NPL, and then like all of them were written off, and a lot of companies die after or became inactive because, you know, like they were not making profit, right? So there was no point to carry them alive if they were not profitable company. So I think the government is a lot more conscious now about these NPL or other financial aid. But, you know, like of course there is subsidies, you know, but for example, if you bring technology, you will have a special subsidy. I have a client who is in Huizhou, and you know, like they do have subsidies, and I have another client in Huadu, which is close to Guangzhou as well. They get subsidies from the government, but they're a foreign-owned company as well. They're not only Chinese company, they're a foreign-owned company. So I believe the subsidies are not only for local companies, but if you qualify and you meet the threshold of the number of employees you have or sales or whatever, you can also get subsidies, which of course help you to lower your costs and become more, it's easier to target the market. Yeah.
But is that not anti-competitive?
You know, like I know in Canada, the government gives subsidies as well. I don't know in all the countries, but the government will give subsidies as well in some specific industry.
Agriculture.
You know, like I don't do a lot of agricultural project, but you know, like I would be happy to check more and see about that specific industry. But yeah, you know, like I know other countries also give subsidies, and I guess then it become like, you know, what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. I know like between the US and Canada, there was a big issue about the subsidies and the lumber, you know, like the wood that was being shipped. So like this became a big anti-dumping case issue. But specifically to China, like, you know, like I feel the clients that I have do get subsidies, or the bigger Chinese companies. I feel in some ways it's still acceptable. But again, like, you know, I don't know all the companies. It's a 1.3 billion country, right? So, you know, like I don't know all the companies. The one that I'm aware, they seem still manageable.
We'll come back. I will come to Gabriel in a minute. Yeah. Carolyn, what is your take on how independent or how influenced are Chinese companies by the Chinese state?
You know, like, I guess, like, you know, when you go to, in fact, a lot of mayors in China, they compete with each other, and they want to attract foreign companies, and they want to attract successful companies. So they will give different type of subsidies or different type of help, or they will make the approval process faster. They're going to give you a tax break. So a lot of companies, as Rock mentioned, like they are like private, they're really private. But then like if you want to please the government, like, you know, you may hire more people from that region, or you know, like I'm sure you heard about the second tier city, or going west, you know, to China. If you were going to Chengdu and Chongqing, you were having a lot of tax break as a foreign company or as a Chinese company. But you know, in terms of shareholding, you know, like the clients that we represent are really foreign owned, or if there's a Chinese company involved as a shareholder, you know, like it's not a state owned shareholder. It's really like, you know, like a private company with a shareholder. But you're like, also there's big clients who are state owned enterprise, you know, and that sometimes are the clients of my clients.
The question is, every company in China is either state-owned, or if not state-owned, significantly state-influenced. So if a foreign company wants to come to China, what is the guarantee that tomorrow if they make an unpopular decision, they will not be in trouble from the government?
You know, like maybe I just have different type of clients, but my clients are like family-owned business between like 25 to 500 million US turnover, the Chinese company. And these companies are privately owned by individual shareholder or by family. And the Chinese government is not involved in that. But maybe there's another part of the Chinese industry that I'm not aware, but you know, like I deal with private companies and the government is not involved.
Like for example, Alibaba.
Well, you know, like this is not my client. Of course, Alibaba and all these you know, like they're like the big player, you know, like it's like Tencent or it's all the other one, right? I cannot say that these they're not influenced by the government. I'm sure they are because they're so big and like, you know, in terms of approval, it's very difficult for a competitor of Alibaba to go on the Chinese market. You know, the Chinese market, the Chinese government will give some restriction for a company to be able to compete with Alibaba.
There are so can I understand that there are some concerns which players going into China should have, at any time they may have to come under tremendous government pressure if they make people unhappy or they make unpopular comments. Is it a fair saying?
Like, I don't know, my brother and I, we have businesses in China. We've been there. We have a few factories. We've been there without problem. We don't have involvement with the Chinese government. So it depends how bad is the comment. If you're going to try to shake the system and be unhappy about the way the country is managed and the type of political party, of course it's going to bring issue, you know.
Right.
But I believe it's the same in Singapore. You know, in Singapore, if you don't, there's things that you cannot say and you shouldn't say on social media, and I think it's the same in many countries. You know, the freedom of speech may not be the concept may not be the same than what you have in Canada, for example, or maybe in the US.
I see Commodore Vasan having a big smile, but before we go to Commodore Vasan, Gabriel, you've been wanting to say something.
Yes, if I may jump in this very lively and interesting discussion. I believe that I'd like to make very brief comments about two topics, about subsidies and about the influence of government in companies or vice versa. With regard to subsidies, as Caroline said, many governments give subsidies to private companies. And in Brazil, we know well the big dispute, a feud, if you wish, between the Brazilian jet builder Embraer and the Canadian jet builder Bombardier. And there has been already panels in the World Trade Organization that condemned both the Brazilian government and also the Canadian government for unfair subsidies to these two major regional jets builders. So I think this is a kind of cat and mouse game that governments invent new types of subsidies and try to get them underneath the blanket so that the World Trade Organization doesn't find out. And this will probably continue because I understand there are geopolitical reasons and strictly pork and barrel politics reasons in many countries for granting subsidies. And as to the influence that the Chinese government might have or not in some companies, I would, in order to stir up the discussion, say that in many countries, we could say the opposite occurs. Private companies influence the governments, which may be just as worrisome. I would recall that General President Dwight Eisenhower, in his farewell address in '61, he made a very bold warning to the American people against what he called the military-industrial complex and how they could try to shape American foreign policy. So I believe that the relationship between government and companies is always sensitive, and we as lawyers, we must always be looking very carefully to that because either one of them might be unwise. We should always keep a healthy distance or a healthy weight between government policies and private company policies. And I am not very sure whether private companies influencing the government is in any measure better than governments influencing companies. So that's what I would like to add up. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabriel. We'll go to Commodore Vasan, and then we are already 8 minutes beyond schedule, so we will close with one last question. But before that, Commodore Vasan, you have a very big smile listening to the comments of Caroline and Gabriel. So please.
I totally endorse what Mr. Gabriel said related to the quality of discussions today and the kind of inputs which have particularly come from both Taiwan and Caroline, because they are there for decades and they've been watching the neighbor. And in case of Caroline, she's been handling cases there. So therefore, the inputs that are provided by Caroline and Mr. Feng are vital to our discussions. That's point number one. On the issue of CTT or coerced technology transfer or FTT, whatever you want to call it, the point of concern for foreign firms which come into China is that after they sign up for the JV and agree for whatever terms and conditions are there, even after the termination of the contract, let's say at the end of 10 years or 15 years or 20 years, the parent company in China is allowed to continue to use what they obtained through the technology transfer. Whereas technically in many other countries, this will come to a stop. So this has been a point of contention for many companies. Despite this limitation, if they come there, obviously they carried out their own calculation and found out whether there would be technology obsolescence at the end of 20 years or whether China itself would perhaps change some of the laws to their advantage. They have done their homework. It's not that they're just coming there and throwing in their money, expecting a miracle. So, but I'm quite clear that these are some of the factors that are not encouraging people to come there. But government clearly, the Communist Party has a very clear vision. They already set definite milestones. By 2025, this is what I will achieve in terms of technology. By 2049, this is what I will achieve. So therefore, when it goes down the line, there are these set targets which have to be achieved. So, all the companies, they are part of the government one way or the other. You can call them, they are influenced, they are sponsored, they are part of it, they are not part of it, they are private on paper. You can call them in any manner that you want to. The point is they all contribute to the vision and mission of the Communist Party. Simple. So therefore, if they have set targets, so they need to work to achieve this. Therefore, if some technology has not been inducted into China, so the people who are there, who are the stakeholders, will ensure that it is obtained by fair or foul means, which is the point about the cyber warfare that we are talking about, which is the point which we are talking about industrial espionage, which is the point that we are talking about, large number of PLA officers being sent to Western societies for research. This is what we are talking about, spying that's going on, which are all recorded. These are not, something which is not in the public domain. So we need to be conscious of what China is trying to do. So there are countries who have evaluated this. America at the moment is very angry with the practices, and they're trying to put pressure on China through WTO. But how much of this will work depends on the efficacy of the WTO itself. So this is the environment in which we are working as far as IPR is concerned. The fresh, impetus that's come is from Caroline to say that they are constantly evolving, and therefore you perhaps can expect a better IPR compliant China in the coming days, but we have to wait and watch. So that's my take on this entire issue of IPR. But in terms of what we are doing in India, I think we are in some of the top lists where we are encouraging patents. It's been recorded, it's including from the WAPO. So that's a good news. So we need to be cautious about what China would like to dump, whether through Huawei. But Huawei is not just a technical investment in India or in any other. It is part of their entire architecture to spy on a country. This is very clear. It's been established. So we need to be careful. So the countries who are trying to do business would definitely need to know what they are getting into, do full studies, and then decide as to what the risks are involved. It's finally the CBA that they're going to work out on, cost-benefit analysis, and the risk assessment which they're going to do with every such assessment. we need to be careful. Thank you.
Thank you, Commodore. You give a very different perspective coming from the security services background. The last question before we close this very, very intellectually stimulating, very, very informative webinar. The last question is, Caroline, you made a point at the beginning of your talk when you said China makes 5-year plans and then strictly implements them. Now, this is something of great interest to various developing countries, especially the democracies, which have rule of law and fundamental rights and things like that. When we hear outside that when China makes an announcement that this region is going to have so many factories, so many roads, so many houses, then whether it is a green reserve, whether it is a natural reserve, whether it is a town, it is out of the way, the development comes up. Whereas if it is a country like India, we immediately go to court and get a stay. So you have seen Canada, USA, you have seen Singapore, and you have seen China a lot. As an individual, what is your take on this when it comes to human rights and environmental rights?
Oh, it's a very good question. I'll have to be very careful about what I say.
I understand. I understand.
There's pro and cons of different political system, right? I understand India is a democracy, Canada is a democracy, Singapore, China, or Singapore is supposed to be a democracy. China is definitely different. So of course it's in terms of human rights, I'm not going to talk about human rights because I focus more on a business perspective. But from a business perspective, if they decide, I'm just thinking about one strategy, like they decide like in 2006, 7, 8 to get rid of all the low-cost manufacturing. So they went to Cambodia, they went to Thailand, they went to Vietnam, right? So they would just keep a special silver lining of industries. So that's what I said about the 5-year plan. I should have specified that it was more about from a business perspective. You know, like if they decide to build like, you know, infrastructure. If you look at the roads are amazing in China. You know, it's all toll, but the roads are amazing. That's why, like, you know, like the highway, like, you know, like shipment of product are so easy. It's not all countries, including developed countries, that have so nice infrastructure. So, you know, like there's pro and cons of this 5-year plan. But I believe from a business perspective, when they have a strategy, they will try to focus on this. And I guess they may not be as sensitive as other countries about the rights of everyone.
Right. I understand from where you are coming. I will not probe further, but I will take this question to Gabriel. Gabriel, suppose the government in Brazil wanted to set up an industry right in the middle of the Amazon rainforest. Will it be able to do it in 5 years? Or will the courts interfere and stop it?
Well, recently we had this kind of discussion when the Brazilian government built a huge water dam to produce hydroelectric energy. And there were a few lawsuits, but in the end, even though the courts in Brazil are independent from the government, and maybe I would say extremely independent, there was a general feeling that Brazil needed the energy. So in the end, even though there were lawsuits and they were freely decided, judges are not people from Mars. They are people like us who live exactly where we live. And they understood that Brazil desperately needed that source of energy as well. So depending on the project, I would say that if it is a sound project, if it has the adequate cares, the courts will go along with the government policy. But you are right that they will have to convince the courts, because the courts will not simply follow whatever the government decision is.
Roick, do you want to say anything? How about Taiwan?
Well, you mean build like a super water dam or a fantastic
Yes.
road within the forest within 5 years? It's not gonna happen in Taiwan because we guys have to vote first, then so that we can build.
So okay, all good things have to come to an end. That is life. This has been a fantastic session. Very interesting, very engrossing, very informative. And all the 4 speakers contributed equally. Thank you to the Chennai Center for China Studies, Commodore Vasan, Caroline, Gabriel, Roick, Feng. Thank you to all the participants and attendees. Thank you very much. I will remember this for a long time. A lot of food for thought. There are a lot of misconceptions about China in the outside world. You have helped to a large extent to clear some of those misconceptions. You have forced us to rethink on our thoughts, our prejudices. Thank you very much.